Have you heard of Melchizedek? This enigmatic figure from the Bible, mentioned only briefly in the Scriptures, holds a profound and enduring significance that spans centuries. Melchizedek is described as the King of Righteousness and the King of Peace, a priest of the Most High God who blesses Abraham and receives a tithe from him. His appearance is shrouded in mystery and symbolism, pointing to spiritual realities far beyond his time. In this video, we will explore who Melchizedek was and why he is so important to us today. We will uncover his role in biblical traditions, his connection to Jesus Christ, and his impact on spirituality and theology throughout the ages. Introduction to Melchizedek. Melchizedek is an enigmatic and fascinating figure mentioned in the Bible. He first appears in the book of Genesis, and despite his brief mention, his importance resonates deeply in both Christian and Jewish theology. Melchizedek is described as the King of Salem and a priest of the Most High God, leaving a legacy that transcends his brief appearance in the Scriptures. The identity and origin of Melchizedek have been subjects of debate and speculation over the centuries. His name means King of Righteousness, and as the King of Salem, ancient Jerusalem, he is also called the King of Peace. These titles already point to the symbolic and spiritual nature of his character, as righteousness and peace are fundamental attributes of any true spiritual leadership. In Genesis 14:18-20, Melchizedek appears without introduction or genealogy, which is unusual in biblical narrative. He brings bread and wine to Abraham, blesses him, and receives a tithe from the spoils of battle. This act of giving and receiving symbolizes a profound spiritual exchange, where Melchizedek is recognized as a figure of higher spiritual authority, even compared to the great patriarch Abraham. In Jewish texts, Melchizedek is seen as an eternal priest, a figure that prefigures the Levitical priesthood and ultimately the priesthood of Christ. In Psalm 110:4, he is mentioned in a messianic prophecy, where the Messiah is declared a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. This verse is crucial in the Epistle to the Hebrews, where the author expands the understanding of Melchizedek as a type of Christ, highlighting the eternity and superiority of his priesthood. Rabbinic tradition offers various interpretations of Melchizedek. Some identify him as Shem, the son of Noah, while others consider him an angelic being, or even a divine manifestation. In Christian theology, his mysterious appearance and role as a priest of the Most High God are seen as a prefiguration of Jesus Christ, who is a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek, Hebrews 7:17. Mysticism and esotericism also attribute singular importance to Melchizedek. In various mystical traditions, he is considered an ascended master, a high-ranking spiritual guide who continues to influence and instruct humanity through the ages. The order of Melchizedek, in particular, is seen as a spiritual lineage of priests dedicated to divine service, justice, and peace, reflecting the qualities associated with Melchizedek in the Bible. His figure serves as a link between the Old and New Testaments, between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, and his symbolic presence in the biblical narrative underscores the continuity and eternity of the divine plan. He represents a bridge between humanity and the divine, a figure that transcends time and space, and whose eternal priesthood points to the unchanging and universal nature of true spirituality. Melchizedek in the Bible. Melchizedek is first mentioned in Genesis 14:18-20, where he blesses Abraham and receives from him a tithe of all the spoils of battle. He is also cited in Psalm 110:4 and more elaborately in the Epistle to the Hebrews, where he is compared to Jesus Christ, highlighting his eternal priesthood and superiority to the Levites. The first mention of Melchizedek occurs in a dramatic context. After Abraham defeats the kings who captured his nephew Lot, he is approached by Melchizedek, who brings bread and wine. This simple yet profound act carries symbolism that many scholars associate with the future Eucharist instituted by Jesus Christ. Melchizedek, as priest of the Most High God, blesses Abraham, saying, "Blessed be Abram, by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand." This blessing and the offering of bread and wine are seen as prefigurations of the sacrifice and communion that would be fully revealed in Christ. The absence of a genealogy for Melchizedek in Genesis is particularly noteworthy. Unlike other biblical figures, his lineage, birth, and death are not mentioned. This leads the author of the Epistle to the Hebrews to highlight Melchizedek as without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God. He remains a priest forever. Hebrews 7:3. This description emphasizes the eternal and divine nature of his priesthood, paralleling the eternal priesthood of Jesus Christ. Psalm 110:4 is another crucial passage where Melchizedek is mentioned. This psalm, considered messianic, declares, "You are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek." This divine proclamation is interpreted in Christian tradition as a direct reference to Jesus Christ, who, like Melchizedek, exercises an eternal and superior priesthood. In the New Testament, especially in the Epistle to the Hebrews, this passage is cited multiple times to establish Christ's superiority over the Levitical priesthood and his direct association with Melchizedek. The Epistle to the Hebrews dedicates significant space to explaining the significance of Melchizedek. In chapters 5 to 7, the author argues that Jesus is a high priest in the order of Melchizedek and not in the order of Aaron. This is fundamental to Christian theology, as it establishes that Christ's priesthood is superior, eternal, and not subject to the limitations of the Levitical priesthood. The author explains that, like Melchizedek, Jesus does not possess an earthly priestly lineage, but is appointed directly by God, reinforcing the idea of a divine and eternal priesthood. Beyond these passages, Melchizedek is mentioned in some apocryphal texts and rabbinic literature, which expand on his role and significance. The Book of Melchizedek, for example, found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, offers additional insights into his figure, presenting him as an esoteric and messianic leader. Therefore, the figure of Melchizedek occupies a unique place in the Bible, linking the Old and New Testaments. His brief but significant appearance serves as a bridge between Jewish and Christian traditions, and his association with the eternal priesthood provides a crucial theological basis for understanding Jesus' role as high priest. The complexity and mystery surrounding Melchizedek continue to inspire and challenge theologians and scholars, reaffirming his enduring importance in the history of biblical spirituality. Melchizedek and Abraham. The relationship between Melchizedek and Abraham is fundamental to understanding the importance of this figure. When Abraham returns from his victory over the kings, Melchizedek meets him, bringing bread and wine. He blesses Abraham and is recognized as the priest of the Most High God, receiving a tithe from Abraham. This encounter suggests a deep spiritual connection between them, establishing Melchizedek as a figure of spiritual authority. The context of this meeting is crucial. Abraham had just rescued his nephew Lot and defeated the kings who had captured Sodom and Gomorrah. This military victory was significant as it demonstrated Abraham's courage and faith in God. Upon returning from this battle, he meets Melchizedek, who is described as the king of Salem and priest of the Most High God. The city of Salem is generally identified as Jerusalem, and the title priest of the Most High God suggests that Melchizedek worshipped the same God as Abraham. Melchizedek, bringing bread and wine, performs an act rich in symbolism. Bread and wine are not just common foods. They are elements that Jesus later used at the Last Supper, instituting the Eucharist. This act of sharing bread and wine with Abraham can be seen as a precursor to the Christian sacrament, symbolizing communion, spiritual sustenance, and divine blessing. This action establishes Melchizedek as a priest who ministers not only physically but also spiritually. The blessing of Melchizedek upon Abraham is a moment of great spiritual significance. He says, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand." Genesis 14:19-20. This blessing acknowledges the supremacy of God and Abraham's faith, confirming the divine covenant with Abraham and his descendants. The authority with which Melchizedek blesses Abraham also suggests that he holds a superior priesthood, given directly by God. In response to the blessing, Abraham gives Melchizedek a tithe of everything. This is the first biblical record of a tithe, a tenth of the spoils of war. By giving a tithe to Melchizedek, Abraham acknowledges his priestly authority and demonstrates gratitude and submission to God. This act of giving a tithe establishes a precedent for the practice of offering to the priesthood and to God, which would become a central part of Jewish and Christian religious practice. This encounter between Melchizedek and Abraham is frequently cited in the Epistle to the Hebrews to demonstrate the superiority of Melchizedek's priesthood. Hebrews 7:4-10 argues that since Levi, the ancestor of the Levitical priests, was still in the loins of Abraham when he paid the tithe to Melchizedek, the Levitical priesthood is inferior to Melchizedek's priesthood. This reinforces the idea that Christ's priesthood, being in the order of Melchizedek, is superior and eternally. This brief but profound encounter between Melchizedek and Abraham highlights the uniqueness and importance of Melchizedek in the biblical narrative. He is a figure that transcends the usual categories of kings and priests, pointing to a deeper spiritual reality. The spiritual connection between Melchizedek and Abraham establishes a theological foundation that resonates throughout the Scriptures, culminating in the revelation of Jesus Christ as the eternal priest according to the order of Melchizedek. The priesthood of Melchizedek. The priesthood of Melchizedek is presented as eternal and universal, distinct from the Levitical priesthood, which was hereditary and limited to the descendants of Levi. The Epistle to the Hebrews describes Melchizedek as without father or mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God. He remains a priest forever. This priesthood is seen as superior and eternal, serving as a precursor to the priesthood of Christ. The uniqueness of Melchizedek's priesthood is emphasized by the absence of his genealogy. In the biblical context, priestly lineage was extremely important, especially for the Levites, whose ability to serve as priests depended on their direct descent from Aaron. However, Melchizedek appears without any mention of his ancestors or descendants, suggesting that his priesthood does not depend on human lineage, but on a divine and eternal order. This characteristic is highlighted in the Epistle to the Hebrews to show that Melchizedek's priesthood prefigures the priesthood of Christ, which also does not depend on human lineage. The universal nature of Melchizedek's priesthood is also significant. He is described as priest of the Most High God, a title that transcends any specific nation or tribe. While the Levitical priesthood was restricted to the Israelites, Melchizedek's priesthood points to worship of God that is universal and inclusive. This reflects the mission of Jesus Christ, whose ministry and sacrifice are for all humanity, not just for a specific group. The eternity of Melchizedek's priesthood is another crucial aspect. Hebrews 7:3 states that he is without beginning of days or end of life. This does not imply that Melchizedek is literally eternal, but that his priesthood is a type of Christ's eternal priesthood. The author of Hebrews uses this characteristic to highlight the permanence and superiority of Christ's priesthood compared to the temporary, and imperfect Levitical priesthood. The superiority of Melchizedek's priesthood is further emphasized by the fact that Abraham, the patriarch of the people of Israel, gave him a tithe and received his blessing. This act is interpreted in the Epistle to the Hebrews as a demonstration that Melchizedek's priesthood is superior to Levi's, for the inferior is blessed by the superior. Hebrews 7:7. This establishes a theological foundation for the belief that Christ's priesthood, being in the order of Melchizedek, is superior to the Levitical priesthood and not limited by the same restrictions. The connection between Melchizedek and Christ is central to the theology of the Epistle to the Hebrews. Jesus is described as a high priest according to the order of Melchizedek, indicating that his priesthood is eternal, perfect, and effective in bringing salvation. Hebrews 7:24-25 states that because he continues forever, he holds his priesthood permanently. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. This shows that, like Melchizedek, Christ's priesthood is continuous and capable of offering eternal salvation. The concept of an eternal and perfect priesthood is essential to understanding Christ's redemptive work. Just as Melchizedek blessed Abraham and mediated between him and God, Jesus continuously intercedes for those who approach God through him. This intercession is not limited by time or space, but is eternal and universal, ensuring that Christ's work on the cross has ongoing and comprehensive efficacy. Therefore, the figure of Melchizedek is not just a historical character or a biblical curiosity, but a theological typology that points to the nature and mission of Jesus Christ. His eternal and universal priesthood reflects the nature of Christ's ministry and establishes a profound connection between the Old and New Testaments, showing the continuity of God's plan for the redemption of humanity through a perfect and eternal priesthood. Melchizedek and Jesus Christ. Melchizedek is frequently associated with Jesus Christ, especially in the Epistle to the Hebrews. Jesus is described as a high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. This association emphasizes the eternity and universality of Christ's priesthood, which transcends the Levitical priesthood and fulfills the promise of an eternal and perfect priesthood. The connection between Melchizedek and Jesus is primarily established in the Epistle to the Hebrews, where the author dedicates significant space to explaining this relationship. In Hebrews 5:6, 5:10, 6:20, and chapters 7-10, Melchizedek is used as a type or prefiguration of Christ. The author argues that, like Melchizedek, Jesus has a priesthood not based on genealogy or the Mosaic Law, but is instituted directly by God. This idea is reinforced by the quotation from Psalm 110:4. "You are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek." Hebrews 7:3 describes Melchizedek as without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. This description is interpreted as a symbolic representation of Christ's eternal and divine nature. Just as Melchizedek appears mysteriously in Scripture without a clear beginning or end, Christ's priesthood is eternal and not subject to human limitations. The priesthood of Melchizedek is contrasted with the Levitical priesthood in Hebrews 7. The author argues that the Levitical priesthood was temporary and imperfect, requiring repeated sacrifices for sin. In contrast, Christ's priesthood, according to the order of Melchizedek, is perfect and eternal. Hebrews 7:27 states that Jesus, as high priest, does not need to offer sacrifices day after day, first for his own sins, and then for the sins of the people. He sacrificed for their sins once for all when he offered himself. This unique and perfect sacrifice is seen as the culmination of God's redemptive plan. In addition to his priesthood, Melchizedek is also associated with Jesus through his kingship. Melchizedek is described as King of Salem, which means King of Peace. Similarly, Jesus is often referred to as the Prince of Peace. Isaiah 9:6. This duality of priest and king is rare and significant, as it combines spiritual and temporal authority. In Jesus, these two roles are perfectly fulfilled, establishing him as the promised Messiah who brings both spiritual reconciliation and social justice. The reference to the bread and wine offered by Melchizedek to Abraham is also seen as a prefiguration of the Eucharist, the sacrament instituted by Jesus at the Last Supper. Melchizedek's act is a symbol of the body and blood of Christ, which would be offered in sacrifice for the salvation of humanity. Thus, Melchizedek not only prefigures Christ's priesthood, but also the redemptive sacrifice he would make. Early church fathers, such as Clement of Alexandria and Origen, saw in Melchizedek a figure pointing to Christ. They interpreted Melchizedek as a symbol of Christ's eternal and superior priesthood, which brought a new covenant between God and humanity. This understanding developed over the centuries, profoundly influencing Christian theology regarding the priesthood and Christ's redemptive work. The impact of this association on Christian theology is profound. It reaffirms the belief that Jesus is the eternal high priest, who continually intercedes for his followers and whose redemptive work is perfect and complete. This view provides a solid theological foundation for Christians' confidence in the efficacy of Christ's sacrifice and the certainty of salvation offered through him. The importance of Melchizedek in Christian theology. In Christian theology, Melchizedek is seen as a typological figure of Christ. He prefigures the eternal priesthood of Jesus and highlights the universal and eternal nature of Christ's ministry. His brief appearance in the Bible, combined with his profound theological significance, makes Melchizedek a central figure in understanding the priesthood and redemption in Christ. Melchizedek's mention in the Epistle to the Hebrews is fundamental in establishing the superiority of the New Testament over the Old Testament. Hebrews 7:11-12 discusses how the Levitical priesthood, associated with the Mosaic Law, was unable to bring about perfection, thus necessitating a new priest in the likeness of Melchizedek. This argument is central to Christian theology as it justifies the need for a new covenant based on the sacrifice and priesthood of Christ. The absence of Melchizedek's genealogy is a significant theological aspect. Unlike the Levitical priests, whose office depended on their lineage, Melchizedek has no records of father, mother, or descendant suit. This characteristic is used in Hebrews to illustrate the eternal and immutable nature of Christ's priesthood, which is not based on heredity, but on divine ordination. Jesus, like Melchizedek, possesses a priesthood that is eternal and not subject to human limitations. Melchizedek is also crucial for understanding Christ's role as a mediator between God and humanity. Just as Melchizedek was a priest and king who blessed Abraham and mediated between him and God, Jesus is seen as the high priest who continuously intercedes for his followers before God. This mediation is a central element in Christian theology, highlighting Jesus' role in bringing reconciliation between God and humanity through his sacrifice. The typology of Melchizedek is also important for the doctrine of the Eucharist. Melchizedek's act of offering bread and wine to Abraham is seen as a precursor to the Last Supper, where Jesus instituted the sacrament of the Eucharist. This connection reinforces the idea that Melchizedek not only prefigures Christ's priesthood, but also the sacrifice and communion central to the Christian faith. The Eucharist, being a repetition of Christ's sacrifice, finds a symbolic parallel in Melchizedek's act, reinforcing the continuity and unity of the biblical message. Early Christian theologians, such as St. Jerome and St. Augustine, extensively developed the typology of Melchizedek. They saw him as a figure who anticipated Christ's priesthood and used his story to illustrate the transition from the Old to the New Testament. This typological interpretation helped shape the Christian understanding of the priesthood and Jesus' redemptive mission, providing a theological basis for the belief in the superiority of the new covenant. Furthermore, the figure of Melchizedek is used in Christian theology to underline the universality of Christ's message. Melchizedek, being the king of Salem and priest of the Most High God, does not belong to the lineage of Israel, suggesting that God's priesthood and blessing are intended for all humanity. This idea is fundamental to the Church's universal mission, which seeks to bring Christ's message to all nations and peoples, transcending ethnic and cultural barriers. Therefore, the importance of Melchizedek in Christian theology goes beyond his brief mention in the Scriptures. He is a key to understanding the eternal and universal nature of Christ's priesthood, the necessity of a new covenant, and Jesus' redemptive mission. Melchizedek serves as a bridge between the Old and New Testaments, providing a rich typology that illuminates Christ's work and reinforces Christians' faith in the efficacy of Jesus' sacrifice and intercession. Melchizedek in Spiritism. In Spiritism, Melchizedek is viewed as a highly evolved spiritual entity, a spirit of light who brings teachings and guides spirits on their journey. Melchizedek is respected as a spiritual master who works for the enlightenment and evolution of humanity, emphasizing the connection between the material and spiritual planes. The Spiritist view of Melchizedek is rooted in the idea that he represents a highly evolved spirit who, through many incarnations, has reached a high level of wisdom and spiritual understanding. This aligns with the Spiritist doctrine of continuous evolution through multiple lives, where each soul has the opportunity to learn, grow, and purify itself. In this context, Melchizedek is considered an example of someone who has achieved an advanced state of enlightenment. Melchizedek is often associated with ascended masters, who are spirits of elevated consciousness that help guide and instruct humanity. These masters are seen as intercessors and mediators between God and humans, providing spiritual guidance and support in times of need. In Spiritism, Melchizedek is considered one of these masters, whose mission is to aid in the spiritual elevation of humanity, tirelessly working to promote peace, justice, and divine understanding. The Spiritist approach to Melchizedek also emphasizes his role as an eternal priest, similar to the Christian interpretation, but with a greater emphasis on his continuous activity in the spiritual realm. He is seen as a spirit who continues to serve as a channel of divine blessings and teachings, assisting both disincarnate and incarnate spirits on their evolutionary journey. This perspective broadens the understanding of his role, not merely as a historical or biblical figure, but as an active and present spiritual guide. Spiritism highly values the symbolism of Melchizedek as a priest who transcends the limitations of time and space. His association with bread and wine, for example, is interpreted as a symbol of spiritual sustenance and divine communion, reflecting the belief that he brings the essence of spiritual nourishment necessary for the growth and enlightenment of souls. This act is seen as an example of Melchizedek's mission to spiritually nourish those who seek truth and elevation. Furthermore, the figure of Melchizedek in Spiritism is often used to highlight the unity and universality of religion. As someone not bound to a single religious tradition, Melchizedek symbolizes the spiritual truth that transcends dogmas and religious systems. This view aligns with the Spiritist philosophy that all religions contain elements of truth, and that the spiritual quest is a universal path accessible to all humans, regardless of their specific beliefs. Spiritism also views Melchizedek as a model of virtue and justice. His association with the city of Salem, meaning peace, and his title King of Righteousness reinforce the idea that he is a spirit dedicated to promoting these values. Through his actions and teachings, Melchizedek inspires Spiritists to live according to principles of justice, peace, and love, always seeking moral and spiritual elevation. Finally, Melchizedek's influence in Spiritism extends to his continuous presence as a spiritual mentor. Many mediums and Spiritist scholars report contacts and communications with spirits identifying as Melchizedek or as members of the Order of Melchizedek. These communications are seen as a source of deep spiritual guidance, offering insights into the purpose of life, the nature of the soul, and the path to spiritual evolution. Therefore, Melchizedek occupies a prominent place in Spiritist doctrine, not just as a historical or symbolic figure, but as an active and powerful spiritual guide. His influence transcends time, offering wisdom and guidance to those who seek truth and enlightenment. He represents the profound and continuous connection between the material and spiritual planes, and his mission to promote the spiritual evolution of humanity is a beacon of hope and inspiration for all Spiritists. Melchizedek and the Order of Melchizedek. The Order of Melchizedek is a concept that appears in various esoteric and mystical traditions. It is seen as a spiritual order of priests dedicated to divine service, justice, and peace. This order symbolizes the continuity of Melchizedek's eternal priesthood and its lasting impact on spirituality and theology. The idea of the Order of Melchizedek has its roots in the Bible, particularly in the Epistle to the Hebrews, where Jesus is described as a priest according to the Order of Melchizedek. This concept is developed to represent a priesthood that is eternal, universal, and not dependent on lineage or descent. The order is seen as superior to the Levitical order, representing a new covenant and a new priesthood that transcends human and temporal limitation. In early Christianity, the Order of Melchizedek was interpreted as a symbol of Christ's priesthood, which is eternal and perfect. This priesthood is not limited by the rituals and laws of the Levitical priesthood, but is based on grace and truth. This view was fundamental to the theology of the New Covenant, establishing that Christ's sacrifice is sufficient for the redemption of all humanity, and that his priesthood continues forever. Beyond Christianity, the Order of Melchizedek appears in various esoteric and mystical traditions. In Gnostic texts and occult writings, Melchizedek is seen as an archetype of the enlightened priest, a spiritual guide who transcends time and space. These traditions emphasize the eternal and universal nature of the order, which is composed of highly evolved souls, serving the divine purpose of bringing light and truth to the world. In some of these traditions, the Order of Melchizedek is described as a fraternity or brotherhood of enlightened beings working in the spiritual realms to guide and help humanity. These beings are seen as guardians of ancient wisdom and divine mysteries, and their work is to aid in the spiritual elevation of humanity and the restoration of peace and justice. This mystical view of the Order of Melchizedek highlights the continuity and perpetuity of its priesthood, seen as divine service spanning all times and ages. The figure of Melchizedek and his order are also significant in contemporary spiritual movements. In various streams of the New Age movement, the Order of Melchizedek is understood as a spiritual lineage bringing teachings of wisdom and advanced spiritual practices. Those who consider themselves part of this order see themselves as continuators of Melchizedek's work, committed to spiritual healing, meditation, and the practice of compassion and justice. Melchizedek is often portrayed as a spiritual mentor and guide. In esoteric literature, he's described as a being of light who possesses profound knowledge of the universe's mystery. The Order of Melchizedek, therefore, is not just a historical or religious institution, but a representation of a spiritual path leading to enlightenment and union with the divine. And the importance of the Order of Melchizedek in Christian and esoteric theology and spirituality cannot be underestimated. It represents a superior and eternal priesthood, pointing to the transcendent nature of divine service. This order symbolizes the continuity of God's plan for humanity, a spiritual lineage extending from ancient times to the present day, always present to guide and bless those who seek the truth. The influence of the Order of Melchizedek can also be seen in how it has inspired various spiritual orders and fraternities over the centuries. From the Knights Templar to modern esoteric societies, the idea of an eternal and universal priesthood has continued to inspire and motivate those who seek pure and true divine service. This order remains a symbol of hope and redemption, a reminder that spiritual service transcends all human barriers and extends into infinity. The symbolism of Melchizedek. Melchizedek symbolizes the eternal priesthood, justice, peace, and a direct connection with the divine. His figure serves as a reminder of the universality of faith and the importance of spiritual purity. The use of bread and wine in his blessing of Abraham also carries symbolic meaning, pointing to the future institution of the Eucharist by Jesus Christ. The symbolism of Melchizedek begins with his name, which means King of Righteousness. This title not only indicates his role as a just ruler, but also reflects the nature of his priesthood. In an era where justice was often associated with the application of the law, Melchizedek represents a justice that transcends human law and aligns directly with the divine will. This justice is one of the essential qualities of the eternal priesthood he prefigures. In addition to being the King of Righteousness, Melchizedek is described as the King of Salem, meaning King of Peace. This association with peace is significant. Salem is traditionally identified with Jerusalem, the city that would become central to the spiritual history of God's people. As King of Salem, Melchizedek is a precursor to the Messiah, who is also known as the Prince of Peace. This dual kingship of righteousness and peace is a powerful symbol of God's kingdom, where perfect justice and eternal peace coexist harmoniously. Melchizedek's encounter with Abraham, where he offers bread and wine, is laden with symbolism. Bread and wine are basic elements of physical sustenance, but in a spiritual context, they represent much more. In Christianity, these elements are seen as prefigurations of the Eucharist, the sacrament instituted by Jesus at the Last Supper. By offering bread and wine, Melchizedek points to Christ's redemptive sacrifice and the spiritual communion that would be fully revealed in the New Covenant. The absence of Melchizedek's genealogy in Scripture is another important symbolic aspect. In the Bible, genealogies are often used to establish the legitimacy and heritage of priests and kings. However, Melchizedek appears without any mention of his parents or descendants, highlighting the eternal and divine nature of his priesthood. This lack of earthly lineage suggests that his priesthood is not limited by time or human norms, but is a priesthood that comes directly from God and remains forever. In the Epistle to the Hebrews, Melchizedek is compared to Jesus Christ to highlight the superiority of Christ's priesthood over the Levitical priesthood. Like Melchizedek, Jesus is described as an eternal priest, according to the order of Melchizedek. This comparison emphasizes that Christ's priesthood is universal, eternal, and perfect, offering a direct and continuous connection with the divine. This continuity between Melchizedek and Christ symbolizes the complete fulfillment of God's redemptive plan, transcending human and temporal limitations. Beyond Christian symbolism, Melchizedek also holds significant places in various mystical and esoteric traditions. He is often seen as an archetype of the enlightened priest, a spiritual guide with profound knowledge of divine mystery. In many of these traditions, Melchizedek is considered an ascended master, a being of light who continues to work in the spiritual realms to aid humanity's evolution. This symbolism reflects the belief that Melchizedek represents a path of wisdom and enlightenment accessible to all who seek spiritual truth. Therefore, Melchizedek is not just a historical figure, but a powerful and enduring symbol of justice, peace, and divine connection. His brief appearance in the Scriptures hides a depth of meaning that resonates through the ages, inspiring theologians, mystics, and believers to explore the nature of priesthood, redemption, and communion with God. He is a reminder that true spiritual service transcends all human barriers, offering a path to eternal purity, justice, and peace. Melchizedek, though mentioned only briefly in Scripture, is a figure of immense theological and spiritual importance. His appearance as both priest and king symbolizes eternal justice and peace, prefiguring the perfect priesthood of Jesus Christ. The relationship between Melchizedek and Abraham, the absence of genealogy, and the offering of bread and wine are elements rich with meaning, pointing to the new covenant and the universality of Christian faith. His influence extends to Spiritism and mystical traditions, where he is seen as a spiritual master of great wisdom. Melchizedek reminds us of the ongoing and profound connection between the divine and the human, inspiring us to seek a deeper understanding of justice, peace, and spiritual service. Subscribe to the channel to continue exploring these spiritual themes and strengthen your journey of faith and knowledge.